I have the privilege of welcoming members of the committee, and I will ask Mikey if she will call the roll of committee members, please.
Mr. Barnes. Present. Mr. Edwards.
Present.
Mr. Martin. Here. Commissioner Smith is not here. Dr. Solano. Here. Mr. Stavros.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you. I am chairing the committee, of which I am serving as vice chair, in the absence of Ann Duncan, the chairperson, who I understand is away because of the death of a close relative. You have the minutes of the last meeting before you. You've had access to those. Let me ask you if we could have a motion for their approval.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that the minutes be approved. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed by the same sign. They're approved. I now have the privilege to call on Leslie Sacker, Director of the FSU Student Health Center and co-chair of the SUS Student Health Insurance Task Force, for a report. Ms. Sacker?
Thank you very much, Governor. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you this morning to the Student Affairs Committee the Student Health Insurance Task Force report and recommendations. I have spoken to you before and around this issue, but this will be our final report to you today. I wanted to share with you the task force members. We had members from across our system. We had members who were not engaged in student health directly, but in university life, either on the academic or the legal side of things, financial aid, because we wanted to see how any changes would affect the system as a whole. We appreciate all of their participation in this. Our charge was to give you, in our report, an update on the issues and trends nationally and in Florida. And I wish I could report today that the national picture was clear, but as you all know from reading the news, things are in flux in Washington, and we have a better picture of the national picture outside the feds in terms of the number of states, so that is all included in your report. We wanted to examine the different types of health insurance program, including requirement of attendance available to the SUS system students. We wanted to look at the impact of options on students, and in terms of, not just in terms of their pocketbook, but also in terms of their health, well-being, their financial aid status, their student fees, and their access to care. We wanted to also identify and target areas where, as a system, we might become more efficient. Basically, we are looking at 11 different universities who do things 11 different ways. And are there gains to be made in the area of efficiency and effectiveness if we looked at different models of delivery of service? The first area I wanted to bring your attention to is the federal health care agenda, which is an issue that no one in this country seems to be particularly neutral about. They're passionate on either side of the issue. And there may be or may not be a vote this week on the health care bill. But I did want to share with you some of the elements of that bill and the national policy that affect us. One is pre-existing conditions. That is also in some of our plans within the SUS system, where it keeps the rate down but blocks students from accessing care on their pre-existing conditions. If the bill in Washington passed, pre-existing conditions in health insurance will not be allowed any longer, which will affect the way that we conduct our health insurance programs here in Florida. It definitely is looking at the spiraling cost of care and prescriptions, diagnostic and specialty care. Primary care is not one of the areas that is growing out of bounds, but these other areas certainly are. One of the things that will affect us directly is extended coverage on parents' insurance. This is something that is very important to us, and we're watching very carefully, because those students that are allowed to stay on their parents' plan longer will come to school and stay in school having a safety net of coverage that will be less expensive to their parents and will not be a burden on the student. And so we are watching that particular element very carefully. We are looking at policy costs and how the federal policy might affect that. It is also looking at tort and malpractice insurance reform, and also, as you've been reading in the paper, the role and responsibility of insurance companies. Insurance companies are not nonprofit organizations, and as they begin to increase their rates to improve their bottom line, we get hit with larger premiums, and that is just a reality of our system as it exists today. So these are all important elements to be watching as the national health care reform finalizes in one mode or another. We wanted to show you some of the highlights of our research. Every definitive study that has come out in the last 5 years is showing that between 25 and 30% of college students attending four-year and graduate degrees do not have health insurance. However, we wanted to raise your awareness that 20 to 30% additional students have health insurance that is so minimal that we are considering them almost being uninsured. Their out-of-pocket deductibles are so high, their geographic restrictions are so high, the premiums are low, but their benefits are almost non-existent. And so this is another group of students we have to pay particular attention to. As you all know, OPAGA released its report, and they, in the top line, said students pay $68 million for campus health care. We thought that was a pretty dramatic opening line to a report. So we wanted to break that down for you and show you that $225 per year per student is paid for on-campus medical care, immunizations, diagnostic care, mental health, substance abuse counseling, psychiatric services, psychological services, preventative health education, and public health policy and practice. So we think that is a great value and makes that number more reasonable and more palatable. We are estimating at the present time that up to 158,000 students are uninsured within the SUS system itself. We have no way of knowing at this particular time about two-year colleges or community colleges or any of the other systems, or the privates, for the most part, have required insurance as a condition of enrollment forever. So we are looking at an unknown when we look at our community college system. This is just our students within our 11 universities. We wanted to show you the range of premiums. Now, these are still very good figures. This is an annual premium. This is last year, so it's current. But I do need to tell you that I've received information just this week from two schools within our system, one who has received a quote for a 35% increase on their premium, and another whose loss ratio is 140%, which means the insurance company paid out 140% more than they received in premiums, and they have been increased to a policy premium of $3,300, which, as you can see, last year our scale ended at $2,100. So insurance companies are going to make sure that no matter what, their bottom line is protected, and we have to, in turn, look at business models that protect our students that are needing to have 4 to 6 years of a safety net should they require medical assistance. So these are the premiums across the system, and as soon as all of the premiums are in from the different schools, we will report that to the Board of Governors staff, which will in turn get that to you. We will keep this updated so you have up-to-date information. Colleges and universities throughout the country are looking at consortiums as a way to partner to see if there is a business model that comes together to reduce cost, increase benefits, and somehow find a way to slow the percentage of increase every year on these premiums. We are also looking seriously at our graduate student populations. 3 of our universities pay 100% for graduate assistants, research assistants, and teaching assistants. Others in the system are paying a variety of percentages. But if these premiums continue to rise within our budget structure in Florida, it is doubtful that anybody is going to be able to continue that. Thus, we are put at a serious disadvantage attracting graduate students who see these benefits as critical to being able to take care of themselves and their families while they are studying for their doctoral programs. I also need to say that we are surrounded by states who have insurance as a cost of attendance and have 100% coverage for their teaching assistants, graduate students. And what this does is it puts Florida in the back seat where we want to be in the front seat for attracting. Now, as we look at these partnerships, I can tell you that schools that have effectively gone in these partnerships who started in a voluntary pattern, in other words, they came together. It was not a cost of attendance. It was not mandatory. They came together to see if they could bring the cost down. What happened was, in all of these cases, it was a short-term, immediate relief for the first year. And when the underwriters discovered that these schools were simply linking up their adverse selection pools, the rates continued to rise. And all of the schools that entered into voluntary purchasing agreement over a course of 3 years have moved to mandatory. But it is a short-term model that could be considered. We wanted to show you some of the states that are currently in purchasing partnerships, and there is a range across the country. North Carolina is the newest. They have just required a purchasing consortium with a mandatory requirement, paying their graduate assistants at 100%. So they are also, these schools that have formed these partnerships are not just doing it for undergrads. They're looking at their graduate students, their undergrads, and their international students as well. We were asked to look at the whole concept of the business practice of billing. Currently, each university has its own process for billing insurance. Some universities bill every insurance plan. If a student comes in with XYZ, that's billed. They're not all in network, but they're all billed. Some universities only bill the student health plan. If they contract with a Blue Cross, for example, they accept Blue Cross. And some university health centers do not get involved with health insurance at all. So all of the models are in every possible direction. Our conclusions. We still came to the same conclusion as the first task force, that health insurance as well as health care delivery is a critical factor in the delivery of health care on university campuses, as well as access to specialty care and diagnostic care and hospital care in the communities in which students live, work, and play. That there is correlation between student health and well-being and their academic matriculation and their movement toward a timely degree completion. We have noted in our report the number of states and higher education governing boards who have implemented health insurance requirements for college students. And we believe that one of our conclusions, as in the first task force report, that there were efficiencies to be gained if we looked at a system-wide approach as opposed to a 11-institution differential approach. We wanted to see that these state systems could be priced on utilization and provide targeted coverage and benefits while keeping a lid on costs. Okay, we have 4 basic recommendations for you today. We are recommending that the Board of Governors authorize the establishment of 1 or more purchasing consortiums for student health insurance to ensure that the system can effectively respond to any pending federal legislation that address health care and insurance coverage, as well as looking at the reason behind that, which is to keep our own costs low, to keep our own costs affordable, and to keep our benefits deep and effective for our students. We are asking that the Board of Governors direct the SUS Council for Student Affairs in collaboration with the health center directors to convene a work group that includes representation by students and appropriate student affairs units to develop an action plan. We think that these are the folks that work with this issue every single day and will be in the best position to acknowledge individual universities' wants and desires and their student body desires, as well as being able to recommend an ITN to look at a SUS healthcare insurance program for our system rather than 11 different negotiations going on within our system each year. We think this will allow the kind of flexibility, attention to detail, and responsiveness to our students that in the long run will serve our system well. Our third recommendation is that we believe that because we cannot come to consensus around a structured billing system at this time, that we should recommend to you that each school be allowed to determine whatever kind of billing structure they want at the present time. So that is our recommendation to you. And that our fourth and final recommendation is an urgent request that we begin to put our graduate students, teaching assistants, and research assistants on the front line in terms of our budget allocation, that we no longer pit one school against another within our system, that there be a legislative line item once we have a system that has standardized the insurance premium, that those are paid for at 100% as a benefit so that we can retain and maintain the brightest and best graduate students who are the seeds of our economic recovery in our belief system. And we believe that this issue is not going away for them. They are forming unions around their benefit issues. And we believe that if we are able to bring the costs down, make it affordable for everyone, that all schools that have graduate assistants, teaching assistants, and research assistants should be able to get support to keep them in their system. And those conclude our 4 recommendations, and I am open to answering any questions you may have at this time.
Well, Ms. Thacker, let me begin by thanking you for a thorough and comprehensive report
Thank you, Dr.
on a
Marshall.
matter of considerable importance to all of us. I would say you and your task force have really done an outstanding job. And those 4 recommendations at the end give us something quite specific to sink our teeth into if we want to. Do members of the committee have comments or questions for Ms. Thacker? Yes. Mr. Edwards.
My understanding is that the 4 recommendations do not include a recommendation as to make insurance mandatory.
No, it does not at this time. It
but-
allows individual schools
Okay.
to choose that if they so desire.
Mr. Chairman, I think these recommendations are right on point, and I would move that we adopt them.
We had a motion and a second for approval of the 4 recommendations, but the floor is still open for comments and questions.
I have 2
Sure.
comments. As you know, I oppose the mandatory provision, and basically because the expense of going to college is rapidly ramping up, and to put another $1,000 or $2,000 mandatory fee, which meant that you couldn't be a student if you didn't have that, I just think in these times it is inappropriate. So I'm glad to see that you were able to sidestep that, at least for the time. Yes. The other issue I have is that while I know it's important for us to consider what we do with graduate students, I question whether or not the timing is right to go to the legislature and have them look for another bottom line of funding when we just had in the budget report, the facts are that they're taking away from basic education. And so I think for us to go there and have to argue that they should put in place a funding for mandatory or for insurance for graduate students, et cetera. Well, we're also trying to talk with the legislature about the basic needs that we have. I just question whether or not it's an appropriate time. So I would like to vote for the motion, but I don't like the part that says that we see this as an appropriate time to go to the legislature. I think we have to, when we're going to the legislature, we have to pick the battles that we think we can win, and we have to look them in the eye and be realistic. And I'd like to hear the Chancellor's view on whether or not you think now is an appropriate time to start that.
Well, certainly now is a relative term. Clearly, at least in my mind, unless directed otherwise by the board, now does not include this legislative session. We're going to have to take this issue, Governor Tripp, and I'm second to none in my admiration and respect and appreciation for what our graduate students do at our universities. They provide an invaluable service. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that during my comments during the regular meeting. But it is a package we're going to have to put together and examine going forward. It is a broad statement. We have to look at issues such as what kind of coverage, how much that coverage will be. Is it family? Is it single? There's lots of questions within that recommendation that we're going to have to deal with. So in answer to the question, I would say this is something that we will not be taking up this session. Clearly, it's too late for this session, but it is something we'll have to examine going forward as to how and what approach we take to future sessions with it.
My point is, though, if we pass the motion, we go on record of saying that, yes, we agree with this, and that starts the second step. So that's my point.
Well, would an amendment solve the issue? It currently says should include in the 2011-12 legislative budget request the recommendation, and if we amended that to say should consider including in legislative budget requests support for, that leaves the timeline open to do that whenever it seems appropriate to consider.
Let's turn to Mr. Edwards, the maker of the motion.
Yeah, I would not object to that change. I understand Governor Tripp's comments. My position there differs slightly. I think our responsibility as the overall group or board in charge of our state university system is to point out to the legislature what we think should be done. Now, obviously, in tight times, they don't have to fund it, and they probably won't. But I think we would not be doing our duty if we didn't point out to them that these are needs that our system has, and that if we're going to compete, we need to do these things. Certainly, Judy's, I would not object to the language. I don't think the language is as important as the fact is that we're saying here's something that needs to be done. We know dollars are tight. It probably won't happen. I know it won't happen this year, as the Chancellor's pointed out, probably not next year either. But if we don't get on record supporting this, that's the part that concerns me.
Yes, sir. Governor?
I just wonder whether we should move forward right now, given the fact that we don't know what the feds are going to do at this point in time. I mean, that's a big piece of the puzzle, it looks to me like, and maybe we ought to delay until that next meeting, which is the call we're going to have, because that could change everything. My view.
Other comments or questions?
Well, I think
Ms.
Governor
Edwards?
Edwards' comment saying, going on record, understanding there's a lot to be considered here with this. We've heard concerning the federal laws, concerning the fact that we should be on record saying we want the people we're talking about to understand that they're important, and when the time comes, we will hopefully be able to subsidize them.
So you're speaking in favor of the motion with acknowledgement that there are some unresolved problems.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Sensitive to Governor Beard's comments, I think as we've looked at this thing, one of the things that we've really tried to do was to weigh especially the recommendation, not on today's sheet, but the recommendation regarding required or mandatory health insurance against what is happening in Washington, D.C., with the general belief that if ultimately a health care reform bill is passed that requires it for all Americans, that question's been called and resolved. And so I think putting that one in a box while they deal with that was an appropriate position for the task force to take. It is a huge looming question that has great impact on where we go from here. But the issue, the recommendation regarding the bulk buying power of not only our state university, but again, we're going to try to see if we can coordinate that effort with the state college system as well to create a sizable potential market through an RFP or an ITN, see what's out there. So regardless of whether it's ultimately mandated or not, that we can find the lowest potential premium for students regardless. And then if it is mandated for all Americans, we've already got a plan in place that will provide that. And if it isn't, we still have a plan in place for those who want it or need it. As it relates to the recommendation on the graduate, I really do believe with the amendment that does give us time to look at it, consider the impact, because this is one of those recommendations, and I do appreciate it, Leslie. I think I acknowledge the importance of it, but the question is, as once was posed, what is it? And just saying health benefits to graduate students is a sizable commitment. We have to figure out what that means. What kind of program, what kind of packages would we be talking about? So I would recommend to you all, if you need that, that by approving that amendment, you're giving us the ability to go back and begin to examine that with the task force to see exactly what might be in the best interest of not only our graduate students going forward, but also the state system, without requiring today any action on that issue, but acknowledging the potential importance of it going forward.
Governor Judy.
because at least the first two recommendations have language that say be responsive to new federal legislation or federal law. So this is really just kind of a statement of principle and providing staff with direction like, okay, let's move forward, but clearly we have, part of that is continuing to monitor what's happening at the federal level and making sure that whatever we do is in sync with what ultimately comes down from the federal level. So I don't see any reason in delaying endorsement of the recommendations.
Mr. Chairman, I speak on behalf of the amendment also.
Let me, Governor Barnes.
I just wanted to touch on the fact that while we have seems like a lot of task force, and they're all wonderful in their own special way, this task force head by Ms. Thatcher and John Rogers did a wonderful job of really taking student input. I mean, we had it got redundant, it felt like at times, but really, I mean, we disagreed a lot about exactly what it should say and what it shouldn't say, but at the end of the day, this report really reflects the students and faculty and administrators coming together. So, while I'm, as usual, in support of Governor Tripp's amendment or Judy's amendment, whoever it was, I want to just make sure that we understand how much time Ms. Thatcher and John Rogers really put in on this specific task, and at the same time, depending on what happens this week, and let's just all pray for wisdom in D.C. right now, it's important for us as board members, when we are meeting with legislators, for instance tomorrow, that we do touch on the fact that as a board, we are against the mandatory health insurance across the board. The individual universities, giving them that option is important, but we've all agreed that we want it to be the university's ability to do it. So I just think it's important that while we hold this off for the future and everything like that, we still remember that in our meetings some of the basic points that we all do agree on.
Before I call on President Judy, I want to comment on Governor Barnes' comments, which I think are exactly to the point. A lot of hard work has gone into this. He's mentioned Ms. Thacker and John Rogers. This is an extraordinary report, I think, and it deals with a very important topic, and thank you for pointing those things out, John. President Judy.
So am very supportive of the task force recommendations. The number one, where they talk about the establishment of a state university system purchasing consortium, is something that is so valuable. Right now we're seeing our costs going up tremendously, and to have the ability to be a larger group and be able to purchase more at a lower amount would be phenomenal. So timing on this is really of essence as well. Moving it along as quickly as possible would be very, very helpful.
By the way, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to drag this out, and I promise you real quickly, at the last meeting I talked about that issue. There's a second reason to expedite looking at bulk buying power, and that is the fact that, as Governor Barnes said, some universities may begin to add to the number who are offering health insurance as a requirement. Insurance programs become like pet rocks. Even if the system comes along with a cheaper cut by virtue of the bulk buying power, I know now what we're going to hear from people who signed on a year ago or 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We've already got our system. We're comfortable with the billing practices. We like the vendor. We'd really rather not get involved in the new one. And I'm not saying that may not be the right decision. I'm simply saying as we build more and more of that critical mass, it's going to make the bulk buying power component of this diminish exponentially. So there is a reason we need to expedite this thing.
Yes, Governor.
We have a contract that just came up for renewal, and we, the University of West Florida, just extended it temporarily for a year, hoping that this would come into play. Now, they raised our rates 34% when they did that. When we did that, we had a 4-year contract. We just asked for another year. So we are very eager at our university to join a consortium because our clock is ticking. and the rates are going, they're just really going up, and we need to renew or get a new one, but would be eager partners in this consortium.
Are there other comments or questions related to the motion before you? Hearing none, I ask for your vote on the amended motion. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, same sign. The motion is carried. So thank you, Mr. Edwards, Governor Edwards, and especially to the task force, Ms. Thacker, and the rest of you who've really put a lot of time and effort on this. We thank you very much. We've had a report on Veteran Student Support Services prepared by the Vice President for Student Affairs of the University of North Florida using their model, Mauricio Gonzalez. You have that report, and we have no action to take on it today. The UNF Director of Veteran Services, Mrs. Cynthia Alderson, is she here? Yes, is to have comments on, let's see, on the Veteran Services. Please, Ms. Alderson.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to address you all. I was prepared primarily to take questions, but I can summarize the tenets of our model very briefly, and that is, as I think you all are well aware, there has been a challenge in supporting the transitioning veterans that are returning from our Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. This is a very large population. Approximately 240,000 individuals have been in that or supported that conflict since 9/11 and are eligible for the new 9/11 GI Bill, which is also what prompted the review as to exactly how we were going to support this particular population. That said, we were asked by John Rogers to review what other universities were doing, as well as come up with a model for possible support that could be deployed across the SUS. Certainly, we recognize that there are different geographic challenges in many of the universities, so the model would have to be tweaked. What I would like to just bring out in general and then make myself available for questions is that this is a very unique adult population that is returning to campus. These young men and women have served honorably. They're returning in large numbers across the nation, a large group to the state of Florida, many of which, seeking normalcy, will immediately enroll in school, and that has been facilitated by the wonderful new GI Bill that has been afforded to them, which also is a very wonderful direct stream of revenue for us as the Chapter 33 benefits are paid directly to the schools. The challenges, to somewhat summarize, are that these young individuals, like no other group of combat veterans, are very young and have been reinserted into combat scenarios multiple times. In doing that, they have faced multiple transitions and are quickly returning from the battlefield to home. The processing time now for these individuals, unlike many, many, many other conflicts, often a person can complete their service and be back home and starting their schooling within a couple of weeks. So they are truly not already transitioned and often not ready for school. The model proposes that the center that there be a center established, much like some of the other community centers that are established on campus, and the center, which will be often manned by veteran students themselves as well as people that understand veterans issues, will perform a service of being a conduit to other services on campus. It in no way seeks to replicate the services that are already available. One other thing in our research is I will say that many campuses simply beefed up their counseling centers and their disabilities resource centers and expected the veterans to seek the services. and that did not happen. Research tells us that it is more likely that through the outreach of the center and building that sense of trust that we will be able to navigate those students to the services that they need on campus.
Other questions or comments for Mrs. Alderson?
Chairman, I had occasion this past week in the hallways of the Capitol to speak to the leadership of the Florida National Guard. The general was indicating to me something I already suspected, but he knows far more about it than I do, that what we are now seeing is the largest migration to higher education that we have seen since post-World War II and the initiation of the GI Bill. Remarkable numbers of students around the country returning to either continue or begin their higher educational opportunity. And I can't echo enough what we've just heard today, and that is the fact that based on the experiences that they've had, not only are they prone to be marvelous students, but they also bring with them particular needs that perhaps traditional FTIC students don't necessarily deal with. And that's why the emphasis on this issue, that's why the resources from the federal government spent on this issue, and that's why the organizational question is so important to not just the state university system of Florida, but the whole country as to how we respond to this. Just offering them a scholarship to go to college is not enough. We really do have to help people navigate in individual instances some enormous transitionary issues. And can't thank you enough for the presentation and the continued emphasis on this. This is one that I think we need to share with our board, as I know the local institutions are sharing with their boards on a regular basis to see where we are and how things are faring, what challenges we're facing, not only in Florida but around the country, and share best practice as well.
If I could offer, sir, one more comment, and that is that many universities have focused on both the marketing to recruit these young men and women as well as some transition services initially, but not as much focus on sustaining academic engagement and success. If you get a chance to go through our model, that is going to be a very key issue. Monitoring their success, particularly that first year. Veterans, typically there is a phenomenal number, and I don't remember what it is, but very few people use more than 1 year of entitlement because they run into life issues as well as academic struggles. So we will have a very personal intervention model with our academic centers of excellence to sustain that academic success, as well as plan to offer a mentoring program that helps sustain that motivation to graduation.
Madam President.
We've been very, very interested on our campus, USF, about the veterans, and right now we have about 1,200 veterans that have enrolled this year at USF. One of the areas that the students are gaining a petition is that there are veterans who are not residents of Florida that want to come to a Florida school, and they want to be charged in-state tuition. And as you know, we are not able to afford to pay the out-of-state tuition for the veterans. So it really is something that's on a state level that should be worked out as a state level for all of the 11 schools rather than taking it school by school. But that is a huge issue for the students.
Other comments? Yes, Governor.
Anything that we can do for these veterans, I'm in favor of, because as an 18 and 19-year-old infantryman with General George Patton's Army in World War II, I served through 3 campaigns, and when I came back, I had a choice of going to any university, any college, anywhere in the country. I didn't go under the GI Bill. I went under Public Law 16, which was for disabled veterans, and we have a lot of disabled veterans. And anything that we can do to help them, because it's so important in what they have done for this country, that we try everything possible to help them get the college education and to help them have a great future. I just want to speak in favor of what you've been doing. And what USF has been doing, it's outstanding. I think we should be completely in support of anything for our veterans at this time.
Before I ask for any other more comments or questions or recognize any more hands, I want to point out that our chairperson of the board has asked me to try to hold this meeting to 30 minutes. Madam Chair, I failed to look at my watch when we started, but I think we've used most of our 30 minutes. So I'll recognize you, but I ask you to keep your comments as brief as you can. Judy.
For informational purposes, I'm looking at the dollars associated with a rather modest center for a relatively small institution, and then multiplying that by 11 if we were wanting to put these kinds of centers in at each of our institutions. Is there any opportunity to seek funding from the federal government or from the National Guard or some source like that to assist us in our efforts so that the state doesn't necessarily have to bear the brunt of all the funding for these kinds of efforts?
Comments, Mr. Chancellor?
I'm going to turn to see, I have none, believe it or not. I'm not sure of the answer to that, but I'll turn to see if anybody on staff or any of the universities have heard anything. If not, we'll find that out. I don't know, Governor.
I can comment not on state or federal funds that I'm aware of at this time, although there are some interesting research grants out there now for studying this population. But UNF's initiative has begun by virtue of receipt of a grant that we applied for, which is called the BRAVE grant, and it specifically addresses the transition needs of the Afghanistan and Iraq conflict individuals. But I will comment and say that that funding does not support this ideal model, that we are woefully short both staffing-wise as well as resources, and still plugging right away at developing the resources necessary to support these young individuals.
Be interesting to see if there's anything there in Veterans Affairs in Washington. We'll certainly look into it.
If there are no other comments or questions on this topic from members of the committee, I will suggest that we move on. I have a note here that I am to mention the Sunshine Census for 2010 and mention that each household in the country will receive a 10-question form in the mail to fill out and return. In my household, we've already done that, and I suspect many of you have too, but if you haven't, you are forewarned. Madam Chair, I'm sure we've used all of our 30 minutes. I have a couple of things only if time permits, and I don't think time permits, so I turn the meeting back to you.
Thank you so much, Governor Marshall. I certainly appreciate your filling in for Governor Duncan today, and thank you for your service as Vice Chair of the committee.